Hi, and welcome to our talk on helping your patients determine their medical durable power of attorney. My name is Peggy Budai, and I am a clinical nurse specialist and nurse practitioner here in Fort Collins. I work in the older adult and palliative care department, and prior to that, I worked for 10 years in long-term care. And in that role, as the in-house nurse practitioner, I really saw how important it is to help ensure we have our patients choose the right person to speak for them, to choose the right MDPOA. It really makes all the difference.
And I'm Jean Abbott, and I work for the Center for Bioethics and Humanities at the Anschutz Medical Campus. I do a lot of outreach on advanced care planning in the community, and I work with the Conversation Project. And I, too, have learned the importance of patients learning to have somebody who speaks for them if they can't. So why are advanced directives so essential? We have learned that when people have a chance to talk about what's important to them, that clinicians and families are more likely to understand and honor patients' wishes near the end of life when they can't speak for themselves. In addition, advanced directives sometimes have a secondary effect of reducing unwanted hospitalization at the end of life. In a time of COVID, a recent study out of New York City said that talking to very elderly patients, even in the emergency department, which is not the best place to have goals of care conversation, that talking about goals of care and advanced directives decreased the number of people who wanted admission to the intensive care unit from about 80% down to about 20%. So it also, when advanced directives are in place, helps to have people have the appropriate use of hospice services. In Colorado, over half of people die while they're receiving hospice services, but as is true across the country, a third of those patients enroll in hospice just in the last week of life. Likewise, advanced directives help assure that a patient is more likely to die in their preferred place, whether that's at home, in their residential care facility, or in the hospital getting aggressive care if that is what they wish. So, why is this important? The way I like to present it to my patients is 50% of people will not be able to speak for themselves near the end of their life. And a vast majority of us will be in a situation where active decisions need to be made at the end of life. For instance, not continuing with dialysis, not being admitted to the ICU for sepsis, or something that is a decision that will result in death. So what is the key question? It really is a very basic question. And when you, as a provider, talk with your patient, the question is, who would you want to speak for you if you couldn't?
So when we're helping our patients think about who they would choose for their agent, here's some really important questions for them to consider. And the first one, do they know you? Do they know you well? Not only that, but are they able to talk to medical folks? Do they have that ability to advocate for you? And if there were potential conflicts between your family members, would they be able to navigate that landscape? Are they accessible? They don't have to live in the same town, but would they be able to come and be at your bedside? That's an important factor to consider. And then really, can they speak to your values, the patient's values, more than their own? And this ability to speak to someone's values really relies on a really good conversation. And so those are important things for people to know to be able to do. And at the end, we are providing some resources for you. One of them is a document called How to Select Your Healthcare Agent, and it's a really great resource for you to provide to your patients.
So why are we doing this now in the era of COVID-19? Frankly, these kinds of conversations need to happen at all times. But I think that at this time, we all have a heightened interest in talking to our patients. These discussions have become much more real. And as providers have talked to their patients, they've discovered that they are much more welcomed in having these conversations than they might have thought. In addition, even if patients have written advance directives, this crisis of COVID is maybe a different kind of death that they are contemplating than you might have foreseen in the past. Perhaps the patient thought they would die of a stroke or a heart attack or kidney failure or something like that. But this death from respiratory failure, ventilator, ICU, sedated, and isolated is a different death and makes people think about what they would want in a different kind of way. In addition, because of the isolated ICU kind of death, COVID-19 may be more likely to require that somebody speak for your patient rather than they be able to make decisions for themselves. And as we practice talking about death, we become more comfortable. And likewise, our patients in talking about death become more comfortable with the fact that we are mortal beings. Now, how do we document this? Patients are able to make a designation either verbally or in writing. And frankly, the bar for being able to make this decision is a little lower than the one for the content of the decisions or the exact treatments that they want. They still need to be able to tell you why it is. I'm choosing my spouse because I've been married for 30 years and he understands what I want. Or I'm choosing a friend because I know that my family will fight. So they need to be able to give a reason, but they don't need to be able to manipulate information quite to the extent that they might for other healthcare decisions. There is a Colorado Hospital Association form. You probably have this pamphlet in many of your offices. It is the usual form, but other forms are acceptable. And frankly, if you document a conversation well, that is as acceptable as the standard form. The documentation should include the time and the date and the patient's name, as well as why they can't sign the form, which is not all that common in the crises of COVID-19. A reminder that witnesses and notary are optional for the MDPOA form, and they do not need to be done by a lawyer or anybody formally. What are the challenges of COVID? The challenges are that the time is pressured and people are isolated. There's nobody in the same room oftentimes, and this is done virtually, which is why we're urging everybody to try to have these conversations ahead of time with their patients as we anticipate another surge and more critical illness. Now, the other important thing to know about medical durable power of attorney is that choosing an agent is particularly important in Colorado, because in Colorado, there's a hierarchy who decides. A patient who has decision-making capacity obviously decides for themselves what kind of treatments they want or don't want. If they have a legal guardian, that person decides as the patient. If the patient designates an MDPOA, an agent who is assigned by them when they have decisional capacity, that person speaks as the patient. However, in Colorado, if you don't get a documented MDPOA as a patient, our law says that there is no hierarchy that says, oh, your spouse will speak for you or your eldest child, or there's no rank hierarchy. It's a strange law that happened in the 1980s and said, wait a minute, there are lots of interested people, some of whom are legally recognized or not. This was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic when some people were estranged from their family. Some people had partners who were not legally recognized. And so the idea of the law is to say who can best speak in the voice of the patient. Now, this can be challenging when you have a round table of people who all have different opinions about what the patient would want. The benefit is, I think, that it may be that somebody who's not an obvious choice is the one who can speak best. And I think maybe this law is good at getting at that best person to speak when the patient can't.
So one of the important things for us to know is that now we can bill for these discussions, and there's really no limit to the number of times that a provider can bill in a given time period. There's a couple of billing codes that you can see there. A couple other caveats: it's not limited by specialty or location, and you don't have to complete an actual form to be able to bill. I think this is an indication of an understanding of really the most important part of this is the conversation. And even though there are billing codes, you don't have to bill separately. You can just include this discussion in a regular note. And at the end, again, because billing is a fairly complex issue, we have a really robust resource that will help you with understanding all the billing and time issues. So let's get down to the actual form itself. A few practicalities. It's really important, we've learned over the years of helping people do these, to make sure that people include their date of birth. This is really essential so that medical records can make sure they scan it into the right chart. Scanning it in is a really important caveat when you help patients complete these. It's important to have someone in your setting help you know how to get that scanned into the medical record. And of course, an important thing is having the most accurate phone numbers for the agents. And then when you look over, there is a place for people to put optional language. This is obviously optional. And one of the caveats we tell people is not to put that they don't want attempts at CPR here, or that they wouldn't want certain treatments that are, for example, on a medical order for scope of treatment form, that this is not the place to document that alone. It must also be on a MOST form. What I have on my form is that if I'm in a terminal condition and I've talked to my sister, who's my medical power of attorney, that I let her know that I want to die at home with my pets on the bed with me. And it's a place for people to put things like that, or really to put the things that they've had a conversation with their agent about. It also, like Jean said, witnesses and notaries are optional. The benefit, if people do want them, is that if they travel a lot, some states do require a notary and witness. But we really want to make sure that this doesn't become a barrier, that we really get these documents done. And then finally, the COVID challenges with signatures. Jean's kind of spoken to that. Because of the challenges, now more than ever, it's important that the information regarding who a person's medical power of attorney is, whether it's documented in a note or on a form, is communicated to the next level of care or to the other folks that are involved, so that we make sure we're talking to the right person.
So in closing, there's a few pitfalls and complexities just to remind you of. The first thing is that a lot of people think that if they have a power of attorney, a POA, that they have a medical power of attorney. But the authority for medical decision-making is not part of the general POA. It is important as the provider or the person that's helping advise your patient to normalize the fact that lots of people choose people other than their spouse. This is particularly true if your spouse is frail, if they're frightened by such decisions. People have said that the longer that you are married, the harder it is maybe to let go. And also the fact that you don't necessarily talk about these things, so it is important to have the conversation. It's important to help them understand that a partner or a friend is also a consideration, because a lot of them may not have thought about that. And if there is no clear choice, no obvious family or friends, and that's happening increasingly, it's okay to suggest some other alternatives. Is there somebody in your faith community or somebody in your apartment complex that you're close to that you can share decision making and appoint each other agents and have conversations? There are people who are available for a price to be geriatric advisors and navigators who will be able to be assigned as your medical durable power of attorney if you wish. It does cost some money.
So in conclusion, here are just a few resources to use that we've referenced. The first one is a simple one-page MDPOA fillable form. The second one is the billing guide I mentioned, and then the guide to selecting your healthcare agent. And then the Conversation Project guide is a COVID-specific guide that was developed by the Conversation Project. And it's a really great guide in the time of COVID to help people understand how to pick their person, how to talk to them, and how to think about what they would want if they became seriously ill with COVID. So thank you for joining us today to learn about how to help your patients determine their MDPOA.
And thanks from me too.